Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Health Without the System. I'm Dr. Tim Scott.
And my name is Mia Scott, guys. Welcome back to another educational episode here. And looking forward to summer. I'm not sure where summer is. It feels like it's dragging this year, but we decided to discuss some topics related to some common things over the summer, including things like sunscreen, the dangers of how it's potentially good or bad for you, some things like fructose, and consuming alcohol, especially in the sun. So we're going to dive
really
into
just
these
looking
topics.
for all those common things, right? So taking the kids out, yourselves out, going by the pool, everybody likes to get the tan. And it's like, okay, am I supposed to use sunscreen? Am I not supposed to use sunscreen? And then you mentioned fructose, and of course, we'll get to that in a minute. But I think one of the common questions we get from metabolic health and weight management is people like, what about sugar and fruit? Sugar and fruit. And I know we have touched on that in the past. I don't think we're going to spend a ton of time deep diving it today, but I think it's good to just give people a little overview.
Yep. And then, of course, alcohol is very common in the summer. So we'll touch on that and, of course, go over some things there. So first off is going to be sunscreen. Well, we know that, a while ago in the mid 20th century-ish, they were looking at research, of cancer growing, typically the skin cancer. So your melanoma, that was, the squamous, the basal, things of that nature. And they kind of chalked this up to the UV light damaging your skin, damaging your cells. And of course, once cells get damaged, they lose the ability to regulate themselves, which then can cause mutation, cancer, and all the things that are unwanted. So with this rising case, they were pinpointing that this was a big era with sunbathing. You had people that would go out and apply baby oil and the sunscreen, the enhancers, the bronzing, the tanners, and they would just bake and lay out in the sun for hours on end and quite literally fried to a crisp. So there, of course, there was a major increase with the cancers.
Yeah, this was around the time, flight became easier, world travel increased, people were visiting sunny and tropical destinations a lot more, and we sort of started saying, okay, why are all these skin cancers increasing? And it ends up, being linked to this UVB radiation. So what's the answer? Well, the pharmaceutical industry has an answer for us.
Yeah, so then here comes some sunscreen. Now, the theory or the concept behind it sounds great, correct? Let's protect ourselves from the potential cancers or damage from sun. When really, the sun really isn't the bad guy. It's kind of how we are doing things and baking ourselves and causing that damage. But nonetheless, the alternative or the way to protect yourself was going to be sunscreen. But
a way to think about it is you can akin this to like cholesterol, right? Like cholesterol is not necessarily the bad guy we talk about.
Yeah.
But if you have a system that's sort of broken or has a lot of other problems, cholesterol can do damage. Sort of the same with this UVB radiation, right? It's not, UVB, I guess, is technically kind of the bad guy, but it's not, sun in itself is not the bad guy. But based on your genetics, your other lifestyle choices, other things that may be in your skin, your inability to repair DNA damage effectively, this UVB radiation can have more effect on you. And turns out so can some of the
in long-term harsher exposure where you can be damaging your sun, or your skin. But nonetheless, sunscreen is applied by the thousands of pounds each year, especially in our children with the aerosol cans, and you see it all summer long. You're applying every single day, multiple times a day, especially if you have a pool or a pond or wherever that you're out with the kiddos. So,
and do you ever stop and look at the label?
Yes, it does not come without risk. And don't worry, we will have some remedies on what we do here in our family and how we protect our kiddos from the sun, but it doesn't necessarily come without risk. So sunscreens can actually be very harmful for us. Why? Because they are filled with so many toxins and endocrine disruptors, things that can oxidize, and they can have nanoparticle agents, which means that they can seep into our skin, get absorbed into our bloodstream, and then, of course, wreak havoc on our body. And the FDA is also very aware of this, which we will get into that as well. But there are a handful of culprit ingredients that are very common in a lot of these sunscreens that we want to bring to your attention because, once again, if it sounds like a chemical, it very likely is, including the words like oxybenzone, octinoxate, and homosalate. So if those don't sound like chemicals, they are. But those are the three biggest
Those are probably
offenders.
the three biggest players that you really need to be on the lookout for.
Yep. The first one that I said, the oxybenzone, that is going to be linked to your estrogenic activity. It can reduce testosterone. Once again, these are all endocrine disruptors, so they disrupt your hormones. Fertility issues, and this was the one that was detected in up to 97% of Americans, including even crossing the breast milk. So very, available in your body to do damage.
And yeah, octinoxate, we talk about that's the oxybenzone. Octinoxate can not only have that endocrine disruption, thyroid hormone signaling, but the other thing to think about is how these things can affect the environment, right?
Yep.
And when you start talking about octinoxate, that's actually one of them that can damage the coral reefs. I believe that's one of them that's outlawed in like Hawaii and, maybe some
California
other.
are probably the ones that are usually the first to outlaw those.
But you got to protect the oceans too. And isn't it just kind of crazy that our FDA is allowing these things to go in our bodies, but we're not allowing it in the ocean?
Yeah, and it's also regulated by the gross law, which if you've listened to our podcast in the past, you understand that the gross law is basically just a garbage law that states that, it's up to the actual company who is making these chemicals to announce and do their own studies if these can be toxic to our bodies. So, back years ago, I used to think all the time as I'm applying this to my body, like if it was damaging, of course we wouldn't be able to buy it over the counter. And the more wise that we get here, you find out that's not necessarily the case. And we see these in a lot of these studies and lawsuits that go with this.
Yeah. The third one we mentioned was the homosalate. And I think that one's important to mention because I think of that one when you talk about the reapplications and how this one sort of builds up in our body faster than we break it down. And it can affect both androgen, estrogen signaling. The other one that I always like to mention with that one is it can lead to some allergies. So imagine if you live in a sunnier climate or you're using it a lot in the summer and all of a sudden it's like, why is my kid or why am I developing these different skin allergies, skin conditions? And of course, I'm never going to sit here and say it comes down to one thing.
Right.
But, add this into that toxic soup of everything we talk about in every previous episode, and you can start to see how these things.
This is a perfect example of epigenetics, meaning your genes are your genes. You can't really change your genetic composition, but you can change the ability to turn them on and off and to self-regulate. And that is going to be affected by your epigenetics. So your toxic sludge that you are constantly exposing yourself with. But the FDA has absolutely noticed or recognized or admitted that the sunscreen chemicals are definitely systemically absorbed, meaning that they're in our entire bloodstream as you apply them topically. Remember, your skin is a barrier, but it's also very absorbed. This is why a lot of patients that we put on, if you're on hormonal replacement therapy, it's a topical cream. Because your skin is very absorbable. So with that being said, if you're putting chemicals on your body, that is going to be absorbed. And they are finding that this is actually in our bloodstream. That is how absorbable it is. But nonetheless—
the skin is a permeable membrane.
Yep. Nonetheless, the FDA noted that there are chemicals that are absorbed. And even after every single use, and they can find studies that it's even days to weeks after an application that they're still finding these chemicals systemically in your body. So imagine if you're doing this during the summer every single day, multiple times a day, especially with your little kiddos, that could build up and definitely wreak havoc on their body. I just want to note that this goes back to the gross law. The FDA's position or their stance on sunscreen said that they acknowledge that some sunscreens, their active ingredients, yes, it can be absorbed into the bloodstream, but absorption doesn't inherently indicate harm. The FDA stated that it is needed for further research to determine the safety of systemic exposure, which is ironic because then they immediately toss this back on the gross law and they toss that back to the people who are making these chemicals, which if you guys understand how expensive these studies are, these companies are not going to do that. So as of right now, it's deemed— sure, it sounds as safe. It's recognized as safe, but because—
generally recognized as safe. And, the interesting part is there's certain, companies out there that produce sunscreens, other products that may end up on your skin. And those very same companies happen to also produce chemotherapeutic medications and other things that help treat cancers that result from some of these products. So you're kind of profiting on both ends. And that's certainly a discussion.
Sure. Yeah, we're not going to go too much into sunscreen, but I do want to talk about what it does with your body in general. So the DNA damage.
It's good to have some talking points, right? Like if you're telling your friends or whatever, so why don't you use the sunscreen? What's happening? We already mentioned that systemic absorption, but so what happens in the body?
So in the sunscreen, like we talked about, those three heavily, those are the three worst offenders for the chemicals. And when you apply those to your skin, then when you heat them up by the sun, they have something that causes like an oxidation, which, like I said, if you've heard of us talk talk about this in the past, that is very damaging to your cells, and they can oxidize and they can damage your own DNA. So by putting this on your body, you are actually promoting DNA damage, which is ironic because that's what the entire thing that they're supposed to be preventing is DNA damage from the sun. So there's another thing also like I lightly touched on was the nanoparticles. So nanoparticles means just that, nano meaning very small, which is able to, penetrate into your skin
Even
and
the
be
smallest
absorbed.
things.
Yes.
I
very,
find
very
this one
small.
interesting because one of the nanoparticles that they talk about are like the titanium dioxide, which is, I know for sure it's used industrially I believe it makes paint white. I know it's put in paint products. And I find that interesting. That's one that comes up as an additive in different foods. Here we find it here in sunscreen. And it's one of those products that's generally recognized as safe. Like, how is this titanium dioxide, which just sounds like a metal on a ship in the ocean or something, how has that come to be in just all of these products that we ingest and use topically, generally recognized as safe? And we know clearly that it's not. I mean, research clearly shows it's not safe.
Yep.
And how does this happen? Like, it just...
Over years and years of manipulation and data and companies and money, and you know the drill. You know the drill here. But anyway, the next one is potential neurotoxicity. And they were able to find this in animal studies that it does indeed, especially those 3 chemicals that we talked about that are in a lot of sunscreens that can have the potential to cross the blood-brain barrier, which we know then that can disrupt your brain, your neurotoxins. Then you can be in trouble with everything: sleep, serotonin, gut health. Your gut is directly connected to your brain. So brain goes bad, gut can go bad as well. There's a lot of things that connect to that, but nonetheless, there are studies that support that these chemicals can absolutely be a neurotoxin given repeated use like we do. I mean, if you read the bottle of any sunscreen, it says apply like hourly or every 20 minutes or whatever.
Copiously lather your body from head to toe in this multiple times a day. Buy more, please.
And gag and choke as you're doing it because it's so potent. Yeah. And then, of course,
oxybenzone, octinoxate, homosalate. I always have to say it like I feel like I have to check it 14 times.
But that's not it. Like if you read it, if you guys are listening to this podcast and you go into your pantry or not pantry, your closet, and you're grabbing the the back of the bottle and read, I mean, those ingredients, there's like 50 something ingredients. It's not just, those are the biggest, most chemical offenders.
And there's definitely more on that list.
Plenty of more. Yep. Yeah. So it has the increase of production of the ROS, which is the reactive oxygen species, once again, damaging DNA. And it's just not cleared by the body very well. So once again, decreasing your toxic exposure. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that kind of covers some of those ingredients, but then there's the one other category of meds we should probably hit, or of sunscreens, which is, the spray on. Yeah. Because that brings in a whole nother...
The aerosols are absolutely the worst offenders. Why? Because they use the things like propellants. So that's actually what's like flammable, because they say on it,
isopropane, butane.
Yeah. So they put in those propellants. And because of that, because you have to get it out in an aerosol can, those not only are going onto your body, however, when they sit in a can and they are heated up in temperatures, and you guys think of like who's heating up their sunscreen. You're sitting in the sun. Your sunscreen is laying out in the sun in your pool bag, and wherever it is, it's getting warm. Then you're applying it to your skin. These chemicals can be so much more oxidized when they're heated up, and of course they're going to be heated up because you're putting it on for the sun. So that makes it significantly worse for that toxic load. And some of these, there's chemicals that are in the can, like the lining of the can, that they don't even have to disclose because it's not necessarily an ingredient that they added to the sunscreen, but it's an ingredient that gets into the sunscreen based on the can that it's in. It leaches, and that is very toxic to us as well, but they don't have to disclose that because they didn't put it in there. It's just basically a byproduct of the can and stuff breaking down.
Yeah, but they know it's in there.
Right.
But like you said, the labeling system, the FDA, everything means, we don't have to disclose that. We didn't put it in there. Yep. And that's awful. And when you start talking about this category too, you always have to think of benzene's very toxic to the body. You'll see that show up on these different aerosol and propellant cans. You really just want to avoid these. If you see these kinds of things on the label, seriously put it back.
Yep. So what do we do about it? Our remedies here at home, we make our own sunscreen, or if you don't want to go that crunchy, they have multiple brands. There's one on Amazon. I'm blanking on the brand name. However, I'll tell you the ingredients here. It is essentially just beef tallow. It is non-nanoparticle zinc oxide, and then they use something like a shea butter or cacao butter, whatever that they do to make it like a more of a whipped thing. And then sometimes they'll put honey in it and maybe a couple of essential oils to have it a little bit more fragrance. That is exactly what I do at home. Yes, this is a lot more expensive to make or to buy off of Amazon because you're going to get a tube this big. That's 30 something dollars. If you have 4 kids like us, you're lathering it up multiple times a day. That can be pricey. So if you want to do this the more natural way, you can find so many videos, especially TikTok, YouTube, doesn't matter. But I went on Amazon, I get it's like a bucket of or natural grass-fed beef tallow, just plain. You melt that down and you add a little bit of non-nanoparticle. Remember, nano is it's going to increase or
Small. Nano's
yes.
very small. So
You
you
want
want
it
the
non-nano,
non-nano.
so it sits on the top of the skin. That is your barrier. You get non-nanoparticles, zinc oxide. You can also get this organic off of Amazon. You whip it all together, heat it up so it just melts, whip it, and you pour it into your jars. You can add your essential oils.
Let it sort of like cream up, solidify up.
It makes like a little whip. And you apply that to the kids. The zinc oxide is amazing. If you're in a pickle and you're outside and you forgot completely, if you ever have like the diaper rash cream, I wouldn't suggest this as first line because there's also chemicals in that. But just a little bit of zinc oxide on the nose, the shoulders, that's going to help as well. But best case scenario, make your own, know what your ingredients are. You can make a huge batch for very cheap and no chemicals.
And if you're not making your own, listen, we totally understand that. So you need to know a few things to look for. So as Mia mentioned, if you're checking labels, if you're looking at the front, don't get tricked by, some of the other typical marketing stuff. Go right to the back, look at the ingredients and see what's in there. You want non-nanoparticle zinc oxide. You want pesticide free. You want fragrance free. What am I missing here?
They'll have the beef tallow, so that's going to be like more of your moisturizing. But the biggest thing is that you understand all of the ingredients. You guys know what beef tallow is. You know what zinc oxide is.
And reef safe. If it's certified reef safe, that's taking out some of those big, of course, I can't remember the word now.
The regulations of not the toxicity. So those are the things.
Octinoxate, that's the one I was trying to think of. I'm sorry.
Oh, those are the things that's what I would do, and that's what we do here at home. So as summer's approaching, make sure that you're being aware. The other thing is if you guys don't like sunscreen, you guys won't even believe me when I say that my kids are out all day long, but yet we just kind of rotate. We have our gazebo. If the place that has shade, we'll go over there for a little bit. Like we'll just bounce all around on the farm. We don't really apply sunscreen that often. If they're out swimming underwater, they're out all the time, and they're going to be more exposed or a higher risk because water is obviously an attractant. We will apply sunscreen like that. But as far as the most days, I put a little bit on their cheeks and their shoulders and the rest is good. Sun is not the bad guy. It's what you do with the exposure. If you're burning yourself, of course, if you're burning, that's damage. That is telling you that you are doing some damage. If you're not burning, it's not necessarily to say that damage isn't happening, but sun is very good, guys. Get out and get some sun on your face.
Yeah, I think that's the flip side to understanding the sunscreen discussion is just recognizing that our bodies need sun. I mean, sun is, important for our vitamin D levels. And beyond that, it hits the pineal gland. It's important for your mood, energy, and can sort of fuel multiple different metabolic processes in your body. I mean, we are built to absorb sunlight. And like you said, I think there's nobody who's ever recommending go outside and fry, crispy, bake and get burnt. And really, even when you start talking about the levels of tanning, that's not completely necessary either. Right. Obviously, we understand the beauty aspect, but really the importance is get some sun on your body. Like you said, try to limit exposures, rotate, get some time in the shade. And if you know it's going to be a day that you're outside for a long time, that's a good idea to lather up the safe sunscreen.
Yep. So bottom line, don't fear the sun, but when you do go out in the sun, you should fear more of the chemicals that you're going to put on your body and bake out in the sun than to just enjoy some sun with some minimal ingredients to still keep yourself safe.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the next one. Fruit, fructose, etc. So fructose is sort of a hot topic in metabolism, metabolic health in general. You will have certain people who tell you there's no room for fruit in the human diet. You will have people say we absolutely don't need fructose in any way, shape, or form. I don't think that we are on that same level. We sort of believe that our ancestors ate fruit. Plants are sort of put fruit out there for us to get and eat. And our bodies are definitely capable of using some of the nutrients from it. So we think fruit is good. Now, whether you're talking just regular metabolic health, whether you're a diabetic, whether you're looking at weight loss, it all comes down to fructose. So that's what we're talking about. That's the sugar in fruit. And, there's the talk of fructose versus glucose and what's better, what's worse for your body. Obviously, our body prefers glucose, but there is room for fructose. So we're going to talk about just a couple things that we look at when it comes to fruit. We are totally cool with ourselves, our kids, our metabolic patients, our weight loss patients. We're cool with everybody eating fruit. And, there's some reasons behind that.
But fruit is different than your fructose in fruit is way different than your high fructose corn syrup, which we will go into. But just talking about fruit, not all fruit is the same. Different fruit can carry different glycemic loads. So, for example, your glycemic spike or load is the blunt that your bloodstream will take after you ingest that the sugar or the fruit. So, essentially, there are a handful of fruits that will have a lower or a higher spike. For example, grapes, watermelon, bananas, mangoes, those are going to have a higher glycemic spike, which means when you ingest that just on its own, remember, we're not like this is just not pairing anything, you're going to have a higher blood sugar spike than if you were to have some more of the lower glycemic foods.
And those are a little bit more common fruits. So
Yes.
grapes, bananas, watermelon, mango.
Especially watermelon in the summer.
Yeah. So these are, think about it, these are common ones that you give your kids. And again, this is not saying it's bad. It's just educating you like, yes, these are going to have a little bit higher blood sugar spikes.
And the main difference with the fructose, unlike the glucose is used in almost every cell of the body, the fructose is mainly metabolized in the liver, which can, or did I say fructose? The fructose is metabolized in the liver, which can get you in trouble if you're consuming extreme amounts. But once again, this is not saying that you need to avoid fructose. You need to avoid the processed fructose.
Exactly. So that's where you get in trouble with fructose.
Yep.
High fructose corn syrup, these processed
The pops
sugars,
and the sugars. And it's
and
even in
actually,
ketchup. It's in
dried
everything.
fruit, you need to be careful too. So dried fruit can have a lot of added sugar. It can have added fructose in the form of high fructose corn syrup. So be very careful if you think, dried out fruits are simply that, because not all of them are. You can get brands that really are just dried organic fruit. Those are pretty good, but not nearly as sweet as the typical dried fruit you might find at a store. So be careful of that. And then the fruits that have some of the lower glycemic index, that are always okay to eat: berries, kiwis, green apples. You get the lectins in there too, so the pectins.
It's just fiber too.
Yeah,
Like the
different fiber.
entire thing is fine to consume, but
cherries.
just in moderation in general. And then we can talk about how to pair that with some other things to make sure that you're really lowering your glycemic load. But a lot of people or patients, especially because we get diabetic patients, they're like, my provider told me to stay away from fruit, and it just blows my mind. And I'm like, if you ate more natural, you stayed away from the process, so your breads, bagels, refined carbs, refined sugars, those are all going to have the glycemic spike, the elevated in fats, the elevated in fatty liver, triglycerides, all of the things that are going to be more dangerous. I encourage you to eat fruit because you're going to be substituting that for the other junk. Like, for example, an Activia yogurt, where patients are like, I'm not saying I'm not eating fruit, but I'm eating like a little bit of my mixture in my yogurt, such as my Activia. And I'm like, that is a sugar bomb. It's very processed. Please just get, Greek yogurt and smash your fruit. There's so many different ways that we can do that for, pairing and making sure you're lowering that glycemic load.
Definitely. And just to take this link one step further to kind of talk about metabolic health, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is, growing rapidly in the United States of America, and it has to do mostly with our diets. A lot of it does have to do with, the different cholesterol-driven foods, high triglycerides, but also fructose. So the high fructose corn syrup and the added sugars are contributing to this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Basically, our liver takes this excess fructose when you're getting it from the bad forms, not necessarily from fruit, but when you're getting it from the added stuff, it's converting it right into fat, basically, right? Different triglycerides, uric acid, which is another sort of inflammatory molecule in the body. People think of that associated with gout. We use that as sort of an overall metabolic marker in functional health to give us sort of a window into the system, along with many other markers. So just really be aware of this high fructose corn syrup, added sugars, recognizing all the different dangers. But we'd encourage you to be open to natural fruit, especially when consumed along with protein and fiber.
Yeah. And there's just a few points that I do want to touch on what fructose can do to the body. And this is still just your natural fructose, which is why, like, anytime our kids are getting some fruit, we are not giving them a massive bowl and saying, have at it. We are always pairing it with something, whether that's, plain Greek yogurt that they can smash it up, whether it's a couple slices of cheese, whether it's apple and peanut butter, whatever it may be. We always try to pair it with a fat and a protein because they still want to make sure that they're getting that fullness feeling, that they're getting their protein to help blunt that sugar, that glycemic spike that they're going to have. And just fructose alone can do a few things to your brain and hormones. For number one, it could actually increase your ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, and it also can
Reduce leptin.
which makes you
your
not
satiety hormone.
Yeah. So you can pretty much not, I wouldn't say overeat, but you can eat more than you might have if you would be pairing it with a protein and a fat. So those are the things that we do at our house. We are a very fruit dominant family. Our kids are obsessed with fruit. We are not afraid of fruit at all, but we make sure that we're pairing it with something else to make sure that we're reducing that spike. like giving their body enough time to absorb, break down. And then, of course, our kids are huge advocates or fans of smoothies. So we love doing smoothies all the time, but it's the entire thing, meaning that we aren't like, it's not a juice. We're not juicing things. We're keeping the fiber and everything in there, but also we're adding at least 1 to 2 scoops of a protein powder. Typically, we do like a Trevani or Just Ingredients, Gainful. Those are very clean sources, so we can blunt that glycemic load as well, make them feel fuller as well, and give them a little bit more nutrients. But those are some things that you can do during the summer.
Yeah, and we talk about how over time your cravings change based on your gut bacteria. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Just last night, I gave each of the kids a scoop of ice cream as a treat. And then I made their snack, which was cut up apples with peanut butter, in addition to, I think we had some Chomps beef sticks. But not one kid asked me for more ice cream, and 2 of the 3 kids asked for more apples with peanut butter. So
Yeah.
just interesting. Again, that was kind of like their sweetness, and that's what they wanted more of.
Yep. And I don't even think one didn't even finish their bowl. I saw there's ice cream left in their bowl. So
Yeah.
it goes a long way. So, with summer coming up, be mindful with what they're eating, but just don't be afraid of fruit, guys. Just pair it with some things and you'll have some happy kiddos. Stay away from, I would way rather have your kid eat an entire watermelon than one popsicle of the red, white, and blue with multiple chemicals in it,
Yeah.
multiple dyes. Just, go back to the basics, back to the natural ingredients, natural single ingredient foods, and you guys will have safe, happy kiddos. Especially when you stay away from the toxic sunscreen too.
Agreed. Okay, let's move on to the last topic. We have a few minutes left. Obviously, this one focuses more on the adults and alcohol, right? I mean, it's sort of a staple in the American cookout, 4th of July, all these holidays coming up. But what do we want to talk about with it today?
Well, I don't think it's any surprise to tell you that alcohol is an absolute toxin. It should be avoided, but we get it. Everybody has lives. Sometimes you guys want a beverage or two, but be very mindful in the summer when you're drinking, because if you're drinking, it's going to keep you or make you significantly more dehydrated than if you were just at a normal social gathering inside. You're going to deplete a lot of electrolytes and minerals a lot faster. Your liver is going to take a harder hit. There's a lot of things that are going to be going on if you're doing some day drinking out in the sun with your toxic sunscreen.
And again, this to me just sort of adds into that whole toxic load, right? So imagine, a typical party. So you've lathered on your toxic ridden sunscreen. You're eating, your fruit or your high sugar cakes, candies, popsicles. There's various dyes in
Margarita mix.
You've got your margarita mix plus your alcohol in your hand. Maybe you're drinking a fruit juice on the side because you want to stay hydrated. I mean, just think of all these areas that you are just inundating your body, and especially your liver, which sort of has the job to clear all these toxins. And how you mentioned, alcohol adds stress to that. And your liver's just sort of like, help me. I have all this coming at me. And imagine, one day, we all know, like one day, yeah, you might feel a little crappy or have a hangover, but we really try to get people to think about, again, the decisions you make in your 20s, 30s, and 40s affect you in your 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, those cookouts add up over time. And the toxic sludge you expose your body and your liver to adds up.
And one of the things that alcohol does is it can dilate your blood vessels, so you can actually be at an increased risk out in the sun to burn. It can break down collagen faster. It can promote more wrinkles faster. It can have sunspots and aging and hyperpigmentation. So every decision doesn't necessarily come harmless. So it's the entire picture. But just remember, if you are drinking, please stay very hydrated out there. Drink some electrolytes on the side. We have electrolytes sitting right here. Redmond's is one of our favorites. Just be mindful that you're not combining those two, because if you are, you can feel significantly worse. You're going to deplete your glutathione, which is ironically how you help detoxify your alcohol. So you're going to deplete some of your other minerals, your B vitamins, magnesium, all of those things are going to be depleted as you are, baking out in the sun, doing some drinking. So just be mindful. You're also going to have some hormonal changes, blood sugar crashes and spikes as you're, drinking throughout the day, plus the sun exposure. So a lot of things to be mindful of.
Yeah. And, thinking about things, you don't necessarily need a provider or a functional medicine provider or an integrative medicine provider to put you on different detoxes and cleanses. Do your own research at times too. A couple months of NAC, milk thistle, other things to help.
Dandelion root.
Glutathione, things that are pretty simple to help you support your liver are a great idea at any time. Take yourself on your own detoxes. Maybe you do a 24 or 48 hour water fast, anything along those lines. Again, within your own safety profile. I know not everyone can do that. But think about your body. Think about the cumulative decisions. Maybe you decide you do want to drink alcohol and you're like, I can make up for it. I'm going to eat some healthier foods. I'm going to have clean electrolytes. I'm not going to have a fruit juice. There's lots of different ways, where you can still enjoy life, not feel like you're missing out, and still make good decisions.
Sure. And this is a good place to add that if you guys have ever had liver testing done and your liver enzymes are elevated, so your AST and ALT, in the functional medicine world, that is a huge red flag that your liver is crying for help. So just be mindful if you have labs and they're elevated, that is absolutely something that you can do yourself. Get a liver guard, a dandelion root, N-acetylcysteine, milk thistle. Those are all very good things to help open up your liver pathways, help support your liver, and, really kind of give yourself a good detoxification. But treat your body well and it'll treat you well back. I think that's the main message here.
Yeah. Have a fun summer. I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I think that's about it for this podcast. So our legal mumbo jumbo here, just a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and it is not medical advice. It is not a substitute for professional care, diagnosis, and or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. Remember that you have the power. Join us in next time to get more knowledge.
Thank you so much. See you next week.
Thanks, guys.